Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back with the weekend's Bloomburrow spoilers. We got a lot of interesting cards to talk about that I think are going to have an impact in Standard, but before we do, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Bloomburrow spoiler season and beyond. And later this week, I'll be coming out with my top 10 list for the top 10 rares, mythics, and uncommons from the set. So let's dive in to Bloomburrow. So first we've got DragonHawk Fate's Tempest for 3 and 2 red mana. You legendary creature, that's a bird dragon. It's a 5/5 with flying, and whenever DragonHawk enters or attacks, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You may play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, DragonHawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. So very interesting card here that I think becomes the top end of our Gruul deck. And it may actually just go into the Gruul Dinosaurs deck and be the top end for that. And the reason I think it probably fits there well is that there are already a lot of cards in that deck that are 4 power or greater. So you don't really have to do much to get the result that you want, which is exile a bunch of cards, do a bunch of additional damage to your opponent, simply for DragonHawk entering the battlefield or for attacking. And I think that'll help close out games pretty quickly in a Gruul deck. And if you don't want the Gruul Dinosaurs version of that, I think there's just a generic Gruul deck that will have enough 4 power or greater creatures to want DragonHawk as its top end. Next, we've got Balin the Haymaker for a red, a green, and a white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a rabbit warrior and is a 4/3. And what makes Balin, I think, one of the most potentially powerful cards from the set is Balin's abilities. So you can tap 2 untapped tokens you control and add 1 mana of any color. You can tap 3 untapped tokens you control to draw a card, or you can tap 4 untapped tokens you control and put 3 +1/+1 counters on Balin the Haymaker. It gains indestructible until end of turn. So in my mind, Balin, immediately goes into our rabbit deck for sure. You just have to splash a little red to be able to cast Balin, because we already have seen multiple cards in white or green that will create rabbit tokens, and because of that, I think this is a easy inclusion in those decks. But this may actually do better in a generic deck that is creating tokens, whether it's through a saga or enchantment that's going to do that for you, or just casting spells that create tokens. And because of that, I think this is now going to be one of the key components of any tokens matter deck that we have in Standard. Next, we've got Season of Gathering for 4 and 2 green mana. You get a sorcery and choose up to 5 paws worth of modes. You may choose the same mode more than once. So for 1 paw, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains Vigilance and Trample until the end of the turn. And for 2 paws, you can choose Artifact or Enchantment and destroy all permanents of the chosen type. And for 3 mana, or 3 paws, you get to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So I think Season of Gathering is at least a sideboard option in green decks, because the ability to destroy all of your opponent's enchantments or artifacts is a very powerful ability. And we know already we have the white and blue Azorius artifact deck in Standard that is seeing play. And because of that, I think this is a great answer to that, because you just play it, you can kill all their artifacts, doesn't matter how many there are, they're all just gone. But then on top of that, you can draw cards, or you can put counters on your creatures and give them that important trample ability, and that may be all that you need to go ahead and win a game. So I think Season of Gathering has a place in Standard. It might be a couple of main board versions of the card or copies of the card. You may put a couple of copies in your main deck, but certainly a couple copies in the sideboard is going to make some sense in green decks. Next, we've got Valley Floodcaller for 2 and a blue mana. You get an Otter Wizard, that's a 2/2 with Flash, and you may cast non-creature spells as though they had Flash, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until the end of turn, and untap them. And I think that untap ability is really a powerful ability because think about it, you attack with everything on your turn, you play a spell on your opponent's turn, and now not only do you have all of your creatures get a buff, but also you get to untap with them and then potentially block with them as well. So I think Valley Floodcaller is going to be a very important card in Standard, and I really think that there's going to be an Is It Spells deck that is going to use all the prowess creatures, and we've got a number of otters already in Standard that do this. So I think this is going to be one of the more interesting decks that we're going to see coming into Bloomburrow Standard season. Next, we've got For the Common Good for XX and a green mana. You get a sorcery. You need to create X tokens that are copies of target token you control. Then tokens you control gain indestructible until your next turn. You gain 1 life for each token you control. So that life gain ability is a nice ability on this, but what I really think this is going to help are the Balin deck I was just talking about, because basically you're going to be able to create in the late game a number of additional tokens that then you can utilize to either tap, so you're giving Balin the 3/+1/+1 counters and giving trample to her, or you're in a tokens matter deck and now you're giving all your stuff indestructible, which prevents your opponent from using a board wipe against you if it's not an exile board wipe. And because of that, I think this definitely sees play in Standard. If for no other reason, giving your creatures indestructible is a really powerful ability. Next, we've got Whisker Veil Forerunner for 3 and a white mana. You get a Mouse Bard, that's a 3/4 with Valiant. Whenever Whisker Veil Forerunner becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them. You may put it onto the battlefield if it's your turn. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I think Whisker Veil Forerunner is immediately looking like the top end of our mouse deck that we know we have enough pieces to make in Standard. So I think Whisker Veil Forerunner is the top end of our mouse deck that looks like it won't be hard to create in Standard. And because of that, I think this is going to be a card that gives so much value that all you've got to do is target it with something and you get to put a creature onto the battlefield, because the mouse deck is going to have, basically outside of probably Whisker Veil Forerunner, every creature is going to be 3 mana or less. And because of that, I think this is going to have a large impact on the playability of the mouse deck. Next, we've got Wishing Well for 3 and a blue mana. You get an artifact, and you can tap it and put a coin counter on Wishing Well. When you do, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value equal to the number of coin counters on Wishing Well from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead, activate only as a sorcery. So I like the card, but I don't think it's going to have a lot of Standard playability, because the key thing here is when you do, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value equal to the number of coin counters on Wishing Well from your graveyard. So that means the first time you do it, you have to have a 1 mana spell in your graveyard. The second time you do it, you got to have a 2 mana spell. The third time you do it, you got to have a 3 mana spell that you want to recast. And because of that, I just don't see any decks really playing this in Standard. Now in Commander, probably a much better card in Commander where you can get that recursive nature to things, and I think there probably will be a solid card. Next, we've got Harvest Right Host for 2 and a white mana. You get a Rabbit Citizen, that's a 3/3. And whenever Harvest Right Host or another rabbit you control enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Then draw a card if this is your second time this ability has resolved this turn. So we already have a card in Standard that basically does the same thing that doesn't see play. So outside of the rabbit stack, I don't see this seeing any real Standard play. Next, we've got Mouse Trapper for 2 and a white mana. You get a Mouse Soldier. That's a 3/2 with Flash and Valiant. And whenever Mouse Trapper becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, tap target creature an opponent controls. So maybe this is a sideboard card, but I think we just have better things to do in the Mouse deck for 3 mana. And because of that, I don't think we're going to see Mouse Trapper as a core part of that deck. Next, we've got Gossip's Talent for 1 and a blue mana. You get a enchantment, that's a class. On level 1, whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, you get to scry 1. So a nice basic ability of helping you sculpt the top of your library. On level 2, you can pay 1 and a blue mana to get there. And whenever you attack, target attacking creature with power 3 or less can't be blocked this turn. So that ability, I think, is definitely one that's valuable in Standard, and Blue likes to have that ability. And then on level 3, you can get access to for 3 and a blue mana. And whenever a creature you control does combat damage to a player, you may exile it, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. And I think, and this is probably a level that you wouldn't go to on this card unless you're playing it in a deck where you've got a lot of creatures that have solid enter the battlefield triggers. And in that case, I think then it is usable. But outside of that, I really don't think you're going to use level 3 very much in Standard. But I think level 1 and level 2 are important enough that there will be decks that will consider using this in Standard. Next, we've got Long River's Pull for 2 blue mana. You get an instant with Gift a Card. And you can counter target creature spell for that 2 mana, or if the gift was promised, instead counter that target spell. So I like this card, and I think it's actually because of the flexibility it's giving you. 2 mana, hey, I can just counter their creature spell, no big deal. Or I can gift a card and then I can counter any spell the opponent plays. I think that is really solid in Standard right now. So I think this is going to see some Standard play in Bloomburrow Standard season. Next, we've got Overprotect for 1 and a green mana. You get an instant, and target creature you control gets +3/+3 and gains Trample, Hexproof, and Indestructible until end of turn. It's a great spell, but the prowess decks that we have currently in Standard that probably would be looking to use this spell, almost all of their spells cost 1 mana. And we already have a spell like this in Standard from the Brothers War that doesn't see any play at all. So I think Overprotect is a great card in Limited, but outside of that, I don't think it's going to see very much Standard playability. Next, we've got Plume Creed Escort for 1 and a blue mana. You get a Bird Scout. That's a 2/1 with Flash and Flying. And when Plume Creed Escort enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains Hexproof until end of turn. So because of the Hexproof ability on Plume Creed Escort, the ability to give one of your creatures Hexproof has been always a strong ability in Standard. And not only are you going to be able to protect for 2 mana a creature, but you're also going to get a 2/1 flyer that you're going to be able to hopefully has enough evasion to be able to help you win the game. So I think this is something that is Standard playable, whether this is a part of a bird deck or just a generic card that is used because it has a good ability. I'm not sure which of those it's going to be, but I think this does see some Standard play. All right, So next we've got our last card of the day, 3 Tree Scribe for 1 and a green mana. You get a Frog Druid, that's a 2/3. And whenever 3 Tree Scribe or another creature you control leaves the battlefield without dying, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So this is the card I think is really the payoff for all of our flicker abilities in Standard. So we just talked about Gossip's Talent, where on level 3 you can go ahead and flicker any creature that combat damage to your opponent. And we also have other flicker abilities in Standard that we use to protect creatures. So I think that combination makes 3 Tree Scribe an interesting card in Standard. And I'll be interested to see what people do with this particular card, because I think there is a deck that you can build around this that probably will be very solid in Standard. But I think maybe where this actually does even better is in Pioneer, or potentially even Modern, because we know we've got things like Yorion and other things that flicker stuff anyways. So I think that's where we're going to see the really strongest play for this card, I think, is in older formats. But the ability to flicker things that will give you value, I think really helps 3 Tree Scribe be a playable card in Standard. All right, those are our cards for the weekend. I'll be back on Monday with a new video for Monday spoilers. Thanks for staying to the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Bloomburrow spoiler season, and I've put some links to some of our other preview videos here for you. And I'll be back later on this week with top 10 videos for our mythic rares, our rares, and our uncommons. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.